Iran just ended the old world order. For years, the United States believed its military strength, global alliances, and economic power could stop any rival before it became a real threat. The belief was simple. A quick show of force would force Iran to back down, restore American deterrence, and remind the world that Washington still controlled the rules of the international system. Many expected the conflict to end in days, not weeks. They believed Iran would be isolated, overwhelmed, and pushed into accepting the demands placed before it. Instead, the opposite happened. Iran remained in the fight. It answered military pressure with its own strategy, stretched the conflict beyond the battlefield, and exposed weaknesses that many believed did not exist. Energy markets reacted. Shipping routes faced new risks. Global investors watched oil prices and financial markets with growing concern. Countries across the Middle East, Asia, and Europe suddenly had to prepare for a crisis that reached far beyond one war. The story was no longer just about missiles, military bases, or airstrikes. It became a test of whether the old balance of power still worked. This is why the conflict matters far beyond Iran or the United States. If a regional power can force the world's strongest military and its allies into a long and costly struggle, then every government, every military planner, and every global market must rethink the assumptions that shaped the last 3 decades. The question is no longer who has the biggest army. The question is whether the old rules of power still apply. To understand why many believe the world has entered a new era, we have to examine what really happened, step by step. The conflict has now moved far beyond its opening stage. What began with a surprise U.S.-Israeli strike on Iran on February 28th quickly expanded into a wider regional crisis. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks, while fighting spread across several parts of the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil shipping routes, became a major point of tension as both sides tried to gain leverage. In the months that followed, the conflict entered several new phases. Short ceasefires were announced, followed by renewed fighting. The United States and Iran signed an interim agreement in June to reduce tensions and reopen a path toward negotiations. However, that agreement later broke down as both sides accused each other of violating its terms. Military strikes resumed, and the risk of a wider regional war returned. Today, the conflict is no longer defined by a single battle or a single front. It now involves military operations, shipping routes, energy supplies, diplomacy, and financial markets. Governments across the Middle East remain on alert. Global energy traders continue to watch developments closely, and international efforts to restore negotiations have yet to produce a lasting settlement. With no final agreement in place and both sides still under pressure, the conflict has entered a new phase where each new decision has consequences far beyond the battlefield. The original strategy depended on one idea: pressure would work faster than resistance. The United States and Israel believed that precision airstrikes, combined with economic and military pressure, would weaken Iran's command structure, damage its military capabilities, and force its leaders back to negotiations from a weaker position. This approach reflected a long-standing belief that overwhelming military power could quickly restore deterrence without a large ground war. The theory was simple: strike first, limit the conflict, and make the cost of continuing the fight too high for Iran to accept. But that theory met a different reality. Instead of ending the conflict quickly, Iran continued to launch missiles and drones after the opening strikes, showing that its ability to respond had not been removed. The conflict also spread beyond military targets. Energy markets reacted, commercial shipping faced growing risks, and governments across the region increased their military readiness. Rather than creating a short campaign with a clear political outcome, the fighting developed into a cycle of action and response. This is the central contradiction of the conflict. The original plan was designed to reduce uncertainty. Instead, it created more of it. The longer the conflict continued, the more attention shifted away from the opening strikes and toward a larger question: whether military superiority alone is still enough to achieve political goals against a prepared regional power. That question now sits at the center of the entire crisis. The conflict also revealed a large gap between the cost of attacking and the cost of defending. Iran relied heavily on ballistic missiles and drones. Many of its one-way attack drones are estimated to cost tens of thousands of dollars, while more advanced ballistic missiles cost far more. Defending against those attacks, however, often requires interceptor missiles that can cost from hundreds of thousands to several $1,000,000 each. For example, U.S. Patriot interceptors are widely reported to cost about $4 million per missile, while THAAD interceptors cost around $12 million each. This means a defender may spend many times more to stop an incoming weapon than the attacker spends to launch it. The numbers extend beyond missiles. Around 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Even without a full closure, repeated threats to this route can raise shipping costs, increase insurance premiums, and push energy prices higher. As a result, the economic impact can spread far beyond the battlefield. This is the logic of asymmetry. The goal is not always to match a stronger opponent weapon for weapon. Instead, it is to force that opponent to spend more money, commit more resources, and remain engaged for a longer period. Military strength still matters, but so does cost. In modern conflict, the side that imposes the greatest financial and strategic burden can shape the battlefield without matching its opponent's military budget. That reality has become one of the defining lessons of this conflict. Iran's strategy has never depended on defeating a stronger military in a direct battle. Instead, it is focused on making the conflict longer, more costly, and harder to control. That approach rests on three main ideas. First, keep the ability to respond. Even after major strikes, Iran has continued to launch missiles and drones. Military analysts have long noted that Iran has invested in dispersed missile sites, underground facilities, and large missile inventories to preserve its ability to retaliate even after losing important assets. As long as it can keep responding, it denies its opponents the clear victory they expected. Second, raise the economic cost. Iran sits beside the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway through which about 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes. Even the risk of disruption can increase shipping costs, raise insurance rates, and push energy prices higher. This allows pressure to spread far beyond the battlefield and into the global economy. Third, turn time into an advantage. A stronger military often seeks a quick campaign. A weaker power benefits if the conflict becomes longer, more expensive, and more difficult to predict. Every extra week requires more interceptors, more deployments, more funding, and more political support. Survival itself becomes a strategic success because it prevents the stronger side from achieving its original objective of a fast and decisive outcome. This does not mean Iran has won the conflict. It means its strategy measures success differently. Instead of seeking total military victory, it seeks to increase the cost of achieving victory for its opponent. That difference is central to understanding the conflict. History has shown that military strength alone does not always decide a conflict. One of the clearest examples is the Vietnam War. On March 8, 1965, the first U.S. combat troops landed at Da Nang, South Vietnam, marking the beginning of large-scale American ground operations. Over the next 8 years, the United States committed more than 540,000 troops, at its peak in 1969, supported by overwhelming air power, advanced technology, and the world's largest military budget. Yet despite winning many tactical battles, the United States signed the Paris Peace Accords on January 27, 1973, and completed the withdrawal of its combat forces soon afterward. On April 30, 1975, Saigon fell, bringing the war to an end under North Vietnamese control. The lesson was clear. Winning battles does not always mean achieving political goals. That lesson helps explain today's conflict. Iran has not tried to match the United States or Israel aircraft or ship for ship. Instead, it has relied on missiles, drones, dispersed military infrastructure, and the ability to continue operating after repeated strikes. Its objective is not to destroy a stronger military. Its objective is to raise the political, military, and economic cost of continuing the campaign. The comparison has limits because these are different conflicts with different goals and geography. But the strategic principle remains the same. If a weaker power can survive, continue to respond, and increase the cost, over time, the central question is no longer who has the stronger military. It becomes whether the stronger side can still achieve the political outcome it originally set out to achieve. The conflict no longer affects only Iran and its opponents. Every new strike creates pressure that spreads across the region, reaches the world's largest powers, and eventually touches the global economy. The first impact is on neighboring states. Gulf countries have increased security around oil facilities, ports, and military bases, while trying to prevent a wider regional war. Iraq, Jordan, and other nearby countries have tightened border security as missiles and drones have crossed their airspace. At the same time, the United States has deployed additional aircraft, naval forces, and air defense systems across the Middle East to reassure its allies and protect key shipping lanes. The second impact reaches the major powers. Russia benefits when Western military resources, weapons production, and political attention are divided across multiple conflicts. China faces a different challenge. As the world's largest importer of crude oil, Beijing depends on stable energy supplies from the Gulf. Any prolonged disruption threatens higher import costs, slower economic growth, and greater uncertainty for global trade. That is why China has repeatedly called for restraint and a political settlement while protecting its strategic interests. The final impact reaches the global financial system. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about 20% of the world's petroleum liquids move through the Strait of Hormuz. Even without a full closure, the risk of disruption can raise oil prices, increase shipping and insurance costs, and add pressure to inflation worldwide. During periods of geopolitical uncertainty, investors often shift capital into safe haven assets, such as gold and the US dollar. What begins as a regional conflict can quickly become a global economic shock. Long before this conflict reached its current stage, many military and policy experts warned that a direct confrontation with Iran would carry serious risks. Their concern was not that Iran was stronger than the United States or Israel. It was that Iran had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. Since the early 2000s, defense analysts have pointed to Iran's investment in ballistic missiles, long-range drones, underground military facilities, and a network of regional partners designed to absorb pressure and maintain the ability to respond. These warnings also appeared in official assessments. The U.S. Department of Defense and independent research organizations, including the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the RAND Corporation, have repeatedly noted that Iran's military strategy is built on deterrence through asymmetry, rather than conventional superiority. Their studies argued that any military campaign would likely become longer, more expensive, and more difficult than many expected, because Iran's objective is to raise the cost of continued operations rather than win a conventional war. The point is not that these experts predicted every event. They did not. But they consistently warned that military power alone would not guarantee a quick political outcome. That warning has become increasingly important as the conflict has expanded beyond the battlefield into energy markets, regional security, and global diplomacy. The lesson is not that the stronger side lacked military capability. It is that strategy must account for how an opponent plans to fight, not just how strong that opponent appears on paper. The next stage of this conflict is still uncertain, but the possible paths are becoming clearer. One path leads to further escalation, where new military strikes trigger another cycle of retaliation, increasing the risk of a wider regional conflict. Another path leads back to diplomacy, where both sides attempt to reduce tensions through indirect negotiations. A third possibility is a prolonged stalemate, with neither side achieving all of its political objectives while continuing to absorb military and economic costs. Analysts from organizations such as the International Crisis Group, CSIS, and the Council on Foreign Relations have noted that each of these outcomes remains possible, depending on political decisions made in the weeks and months ahead. What is already clear is that this conflict has changed how governments think about power. Military strength remains essential, but this war has shown that precision weapons, advanced aircraft, and superior technology do not always produce a quick political result. Endurance, economic resilience, and the ability to impose long-term costs have become just as important in modern conflict. That is why military planners, investors, and world leaders continue to watch every new development so closely. The outcome will shape not only security in the Middle East, but also global energy markets, international alliances, and future military strategy. Whether this crisis ends through negotiation, prolonged deterrence, or further escalation, one fact has already reshaped the strategic debate. The old assumption that overwhelming military power alone can quickly decide the outcome of every conflict is now under greater scrutiny than it has been in decades. The world has not changed because the strongest power disappeared. It has changed because the rules of power are being tested in ways the old world order never expected. If you enjoy fact-based geopolitical analysis grounded in history, strategy, and evidence, subscribe for more.